I will say we're trying to give those individual homeowners a fighting chance, right? Like fundamentally, companies that can just optimize, they do have that advantage, right? They can find these cleaners that they charge the least to and use technology to automate like the messaging and everything. But yeah, I think fundamentally, individual homeowners and hosts can offer the best experience, right? Like you have that opportunity to personalize the experience.
This is episode number 59 of the Short-Term Rental Success Stories podcast. Are you an investor that's looking to have your home professionally managed? Go to cohostit.com for more information. Welcome back to Short-Term Rental Success Stories. I'm your host, Julian Sage. This is a show where I talk to hosts about their journeys in starting and growing their short-term rental business. My goal is that you'll be able to walk away with practical information that'll help you become a better host and learn how to scale your business. Like any exceptional host, we all strive for 5-star reviews, so please go on over to iTunes and let us know what you enjoy, as it really helps support the show. If you haven't done so already, go on over to our Facebook group, The Host Nation, to connect with the community. Hey, what is going on, Host Nation? I'm super excited to be back again with you this week. In this episode, we have the special honor of speaking with Jack Forbes. Jack is the co-founder of Copa.co, a direct booking site that allows guests to find short and medium-term furnished apartments and hosts with business professionals. There's been a big pivot in the short-term rental space where a lot of hosts are pivoting to be able to accommodate medium-term guests or guests that will be staying for typically anywhere from a month onward. A medium-term guest is typically going to be a type of corporate client where you are getting them from, let's say, a hospital or another business. There's been a lot of interest in trying to find and accommodate these types of guests. A lot of hosts have been going to sites like furnishfinders.com, also hosts putting their listings on sites like Zillow to try to be able to offer month-to-month rentals. One of the things, though, is that a lot of hosts are also trying to separate themselves from these OTAs like Airbnb, Booking.com, Vrbo, and trying to diversify themselves onto different platforms. But it doesn't really matter which platform you go to because you're always going to be dependent on another platform for your guests. As professionals, we're always talking about direct booking sites and trying to capture that guest information and lead them back to our websites. For a lot of hosts, it's been one of those things where it's been on the back burner saying, okay, I'm going to do this eventually. But right now, since everything that has been especially happening with Airbnb, many hosts are trying to look for different ways to be able to diversify themselves. But still, even if you are diversifying yourself, you're still going to be dependent on that platform to be able to provide you guests. Well, that's why I'm super excited to talk with Jack Forbes, because Jack is going to be sharing with us information on how you're able to take leads from the source. And this is where you're going to be working with businesses, hospitals, and different types of organizations and get them to directly stay with you. So this episode is really unique because Jack is talking about trying to get leads for a direct booking site that is basically connecting you to another renter. So you could imagine Jack is trying to create something similar to like a furnished finder. But as a host, the information that Jack's going to be sharing is invaluable because you can apply the same things that Jack is doing in his own business into yours. Jack talks about how Copa started, how they find businesses that provide corporate clients, the challenges of scaling a direct booking site, and how they get hosts and renters to their platform. If you like my show notes for this episode, go to shorttermsage.com/STR59. Or if you like my show notes sent directly to your inbox every week, then go to shorttermsage.com/show notes. With all that being said, on to this week's conversation. Hey, welcome back, Host Nation, to another episode of Short-Term Rental Success Stories. In this episode, we have the special honor of speaking with Jack Forbes. Now, Jack is the one of the co-founders of a direct booking site called Kopa, and Copa allows you to be able to find furnished apartments and compatible housemates. So it's not exclusive to traveling nurses, but Jack actually reached out to me on LinkedIn, which is kind of interesting, saying like, hey, I heard about the podcast and, this is what we're doing. And I definitely wanted to, share this resource with the Host Nation community. But, and then I got a phone call and a text message from this guy named Jack who said he was working with Copa on my phone. I was just like, how did this guy find me? And he said that he found me through Furnish Finder. So Jack was going through Furnish Finder in my area, gave me a call, and I was like, are you trying to stalk me, or is this just an uncanny coincidence? But Jack is a real go-getter, and I definitely wanted to get him on the show. So Jack, would you please introduce yourself, let the Host Nation know who you are and what inspired you to get into the short-term rental world?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for hosting me. First of all, really appreciate it. Happy to talk about Copa. That is my life. And it was a pretty funny coincidence that I gave you a call after also connecting on LinkedIn. The double whammy there. Yeah, so briefly about Copa. It's first worth noting I am one of three co-founders. Zach and Courtney are my two other co-founders, and we would not be where we are today without them. So shout out to them. They're phenomenal humans. Copa, for the kind of in a nutshell, like you touched on, is the medium-term furnished housing marketplace. So basically, the in a nutshell is that we moved 52 times in the span of 7 years between the three of us co-founders, and found it to be quite the struggle every time for those 4 to 6 month stays that we had. We were interns 15 times over, new grads, moved around a lot, and found that started to support the longer stays, but we just saw that the renting experience we wanted was pretty different from the vacationing experience. So with that, we help renters form compatible groups of housemates, amongst other things. And yeah, we started 5 years ago and have come a long way since.
And how many bookings are you getting through Copa right now?
Yeah, we've been approaching 250 bookings per month now. So we just went full time on Copa about 2 years ago. So just kind of been ramping up new markets while we've been focused on product kind of every year up until now.
Awesome. And I definitely want to hear about how you started Copa. But for those of you, for the listeners, can you kind of explain how Copa works, the model, and what how the direct booking integrates with like Airbnb or these different sites? Like what is Copa?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm sure a lot of you listening are on Airbnb. We work very similarly to Airbnb from your perspective. We're kind of like Airbnb for these longer stays. Again, we found renting to be a pretty different experience from vacationing, where, as a host, even you want more verification about these people, right? Like a 6 month stay is a much bigger deal than 6 days. So you typically want more of like a rental application, a security deposit, a lease. And from a renter's perspective as well, there's other things that we needed as well. We needed to be able to find people to live with in many cases, because with urbanization growing faster than ever, cities are more expensive than ever to live in. And whether you're an intern, a travel nurse, maybe even in the military, in many cases, to afford rent in those places, you have to live with people. So yeah, we kind of have a housemate search or housemate finder built into the housing search that we also have created. And other kind of renting things that differ from Airbnb too include needing to see a commute time, because usually you're moving for work or school, and it really comes down to like, how close can I be to that destination. Our service fees are a lot lower. That's another really big one, where we tried using Airbnb ourselves, but found for, again, these 4 to 6 month stays, that service fee ended up being anywhere from like $1,000 to $3,000. And, we couldn't really afford that, especially as kind of younger renters. So, yeah, we only charge 1% service fee to hosts and 2% to renters. And, don't plan on charging more, since we're hoping to not get caught in the fundraising hamster wheel that involves, having to basically answer to investors and kind of optimize profits. But instead, we hope to run, more of like a long-term business that doesn't have to grow at hyper rates, but rather can, serve a purpose that genuinely has a positive impact. So yeah, that's kind of the in a nutshell.
No, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. It's, I wanted to get you on here, Jack, not only to share it with the community, but also to highlight the different people that are in the space. Because a lot of hosts that maybe just get into short-term renting, they're just thinking of hosting, but, there's different aspects of short-term rentals. One of the terms that you said was a midterm rental. There's lots of other, fields within the short-term rental community. So prior to getting into this, did you know what hosting was? Did you know, do you even know what hosts do now? Do you have a better understanding of kind of what the community is like? How has this been?
Yeah, so I honestly was not familiar with hosting before starting Copa, but I actually have since been a host on Copa. So I do rent out one place in San Francisco, honestly, to kind of dog food our app. For those of you that don't know the term dog food, Google has made it popular, but I'm sure others use it as well. It basically means using your own product to make sure you're creating something that you enjoy using. So yeah, having been a host for over 2 years now through Copa, I have definitely understood the host side a lot better. And it's worth noting too. One of the original reasons I started Copa with my co-founders is because we all had some, not so great renting experiences, some not so great kind of landlords, but we also had really great landlords and hosts. And, we thought, why can't the not as great hosts or experiences we had always be those great ones? And that really was the main inspiration, is like those great hosts I had were just phenomenal, right? Like some of the things they would do. One of those hosts, who was actually one of our very first hosts on Copa, would let you pay in Bitcoin if you wanted. No one really did that, but the fact that he offered it was really cool. He would put together a dinner for everyone staying at his 5 places he rents out every 4 months. So, he would typically have new renters every 4 months and would have a big dinner with everyone. He was obviously just your typical, very responsive, all that. But I just saw how down to earth he was, and doing some things that I hadn't really seen before as a renter. And I was like, okay, that's really cool. I want to, try and encourage all hosts to do the same.
And with this, because a direct booking site, or kind of what you're creating is like an OTA. Would you consider Copa more like an OTA or a direct booking site?
It's a good question. I would say more of a direct booking site, since all bookings are completed through Copa. So it's more like Airbnb. We're not just a lead generation like, Craigslist, for example. We have an end-to-end experience. And the reason we did this is because, again, we built that experience we wanted as renters, right? So we were actually Canadian students from Ontario, Zach and I at least, coming to the US for those internships. And in some cases, hosts genuinely wanted us to mail a carrier check across the border uh, for that initial deposit. And, some of those experiences that were just really inconvenient, kind of disjointed, we thought, well, why can't we just always have that seamless experience of booking a place like you get on Airbnb? And that is definitely a major differentiator from the Craigslist and the furnished finders and them. And on top of that, we also at the same time saw this TED talk we really liked called "What Is Home," and it's by a guy named Pico Iyer, and I just love the talk. And the gist of it is basically, he makes the argument that home is a combination of the place you live, the people you live with, and the experiences you have. And I couldn't agree more, right? It's not just about, that physical apartment you're in, but rather those housemates you're living with, the adventures you have outside of the house while you're living there. And we kind of check off, the place to live and the people to live with. We help renters find both of those. But we actually now also have started helping renters, get out of the house and find things to do. And not everyone would want that, right? If we're helping a family, find a apartment to live in for 3 months while their new house is built, they may not be interested in any kind of Copa adventures of sorts, but the interns, the new grads, the travel nurses, a lot of other renters, really are interested in getting help with, like what is there to do outside, like in this new city I'm in? Who else can I do that with? Personally, it may not come across this way, but I'm an introvert, and I kind of gain mana, so to speak, by being alone, and that can definitely make it tough to convince myself to and get out of the house and try new things on those internships and even now. And we want to kind of help with that by lowering the barrier to entry, uh, and ultimately helping people find a community. Right? I used to think that was the cheesiest term, but in the last couple of years, I actually finally get what community really means. It's kind of like feeling like you belong somewhere, and yeah, that's the kind of third leg of the stool: the things to do and people to do it with that we're also trying to solve for now. And if if the experience on Copa ended at message host, and then you just take a call and work directly, we wouldn't be able to do Copa Adventures either.
So you're trying to include more aspects of Copa to turn it more from just connecting a traveler with a home to where you're trying to create all of these other experiences, kind of converting into some type of online travel agency where you have experiences and all these other things to make it a more full experience.
Exactly. Yeah. We found that the kind of Craigslist experience of just message landlord and then it ends there, didn't feel very human. Like it wasn't the most fulfilling experience. And Airbnb experience is a cool thing that they've run where hosts are essentially kind of tour guides, but we see an opportunity for something kind of at a higher level than that. Instead of turning hosts into the tour guides, we can literally recommend any activity. It doesn't have to be hosted by a Copa host. It could literally just be, here's a really awesome mini putt place near you. Here's a great hike to go on. We don't have to make money from this kind of Copa adventures side of things, but genuinely we can have a positive impact on people's lives, right? Like we can help them feel less lonely staying indoors. And honestly, I think that loneliness and feeling like, the lack of motivation to get outside and meet other people really can contribute to a lot of the mental health issues we see nowadays, right? So I think there's honestly a huge opportunity to even help fight depression and other, anxiety and kind of mental health issues that are prevalent right now. So personally, that's like what really drives me is more than just like a housing platform, but the opportunity to have a truly net positive experience on people's lives. And I touched on this previously, but instead of starting a company that we can just hyper grow, make as much money as possible, pump as much money into the company as possible. Instead, if we can measure our success by kind of that positive impact we have on people, I think that's just a much cooler and honestly a goal I hope more companies shoot for. Yeah.
With everything that's been happening right now, have you seen an increase in growth on your site, or because of the lack of bookings that are happening in the world, have you seen a decrease in your traffic?
Definitely a huge increase in supply. So, a lot of the kind of Airbnb short term, 1 to 30 day hosts have been really flocking to the, medium term housing that we do. So huge increase in supply. Demand has stayed steady and grown a bit, not as much as we had projected, but there are obviously people still moving around renting, the travel nurses we help, students that have been kicked out of on-campus housing, and we are helping them through an initiative we introduced called Copa for Good. So Copa for Good is essentially us taking all of the hosts and property managers on Copa and saying, hey, if you can kind of hold yourself to these standards of cleanliness, discounted rates, some of the basic procedures of making sure someone doesn't move out, move in within 48 hours, making sure there's basic cleaning supplies, toilet paper, etc. If you can all hold yourselves to this, we'll mark your profile and all your listings as Copa for Good spaces. And then, the travel nurses, the students, people who just can't go home to risk getting a family member sick, they can all then see these spaces that are a good fit for them. So through that initiative, we've seen quite a few more renters coming to us. But yeah, definitely not like the increase in demand we were seeing, but still an increase of some sort.
And can you explain that term, medium stays that you threw around a couple times now?
Yeah, I want to make this a thing. So I find the current terminology rather confusing. So you got short term, which if you Google it is technically 1 to 30 days. You got long term, which personally I always considered a year or more. Um, and then the in between currently is called extended stay, flexible lease, month to month, monthly. There's just such a array of terminology there. But really, the term that makes sense between short and long is medium. Again, if you Google medium, it literally is the in between of short and long. So I want to make medium term housing a thing. I want that to be the standard. No more extended stay or flexible lease or monthly. So that's what we're kind of calling ourselves, is the medium term furnished housing marketplace. So we do 1 month minimum stays, tend to go up to a year, but we do support longer if needed, with an average of 4 to 6 month rentals right now.
So more in line with what the corporate housing world kind of already says is their standard.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. And can you talk to us about, because there's a lot of hosts that are listening to this, and we've seen all these crazy things happening with Airbnb, and lots of hosts are very angry trying to get off the platform, trying to do the hashtag book direct movement, and finding alternatives to having all of your traffic come from a single source. So utilizing, Copa, utilizing furnish finders, maybe some people use Craigslist. I've seen a lot of hosts go onto Zillow and all these different platforms, all just to kind of feed into their own listings. So what was that like when you first started Copa? Like for a host that's just starting to take on trying to get more direct bookings, how was it when Copa first started to be able to try to get those first people to, find out about you guys?
Yeah, we actually started focused solely on interns. So the first version of Copa even required a student email address as a renter to sign up. Um, you could say I was very small-minded in some regards, because, yeah, I just saw a problem I personally faced trying to find housing during those internships and said, oh, well, let's just solve that specific problem. Thankfully, my co-founder Courtney joined very early on, and she's the designer and bigger thinker of the group, and said, well, why are you restricting it to only students? I mean, there's plenty of people in a similar boat we've talked about already: digital nomads, travel nurses, new hires moving to a new city, that need the same thing. So that's the point where we opened it up. But since we started with interns, the hosts, getting them on board actually was a much better pitch, because they had been hosting these interns for years, and San Francisco was ground zero for us. And saying, hey, how you've been trying to use Craigslist to rent specifically to this renter demographic. Our platform is exclusively built for that demographic. So we're like the same thing, and it was even free at the time. So it was, actually a pretty easy argument initially, which led to, a good kind of fundamental base of hosts and listings to really prove out Copa as a company and prove, find product market fit.
So when Copa first started, you were trying to fill a need, and for the hosts that are listening, that need, your property has, hopefully you've built a brand, you have a target customer. Your target customer at that time was interns. How are you getting in front of your target customers? Were you like cold calling school or cold calling different businesses and saying like, hey, we house interns? Like what was that process for you?
Yeah, so getting the hosts initially involved just asking the interns we knew, hey, where did you stay for this internship? Did you like staying there? If so, can you introduce me to the host? And that worked quite well. Some of those hosts would then have 6 properties they manage, and before you know it, you can get 100 plus listings to kind of prove the concept. Renters initially came from employer partnerships. So a lot of tech companies here in Silicon Valley that, again, we would even have the interns introduce us to their university recruiter and say, hey, like I started using this service to find housing. It worked well. You should offer it to the other interns. We started working with some of the universities. So University of Waterloo, where Zach and I are from, has 20,000 cooperative education students every year that work, uh, anywhere from locally in Ontario to US and beyond. And in the San Francisco Bay Area, for example, alone, Waterloo sends 500 interns every 4 months. So that alone was a really big channel for us. And we're honestly still like approaching kind of 100% of those students coming to Copa to find a place to live. So yeah, those were our initial renter growth channels. And since that has evolved into, SEO, right? Search engine optimization, showing at the top of Google. We now manage 221 Facebook groups across the US for every major university, and even just some high level city ones. We have a lot of partnerships now. So over 100 partnerships with medical staffing agencies, schools, relocation companies, and yeah, kind of a few other renter channels too. But that's where it started initially.
Yeah, that is so cool. I want to dive more into that. I think that this is a real special episode for those that are listening. That one channel that you found, it was kind of like, in hosting we call it kind of like the Golden Goose. Like you find that investor client who just keeps on throwing more properties at you, and you're just building up your management portfolio like that. But you found that Golden Goose coming from a single channel that was supplying interns for you for the properties that you were connecting them with. Was that kind of like the game changer? Did everything change at that point?
Oh, it's a good question. I feel like there wasn't a single point where everything changes. That's really just where we got started, since that was our use case as Waterloo interns ourselves. To expand on that a little bit, the way cooperative education programs work is they're a form of work integrated learning. So in our case at Waterloo, we're required to have 5 internships before we graduate. And those internships are built into the program. So you switch off 4 months of school, 4 months of work, 4 months of school, 4 months of work for 5 years, which is really great for hosts because you get consistent interns all year round, that can actually pay pretty well, since in many cases they're at, tech companies, financial institutions, what have you. They get stipends from their employer. So yeah, hosts have really just loved hosting these kind of interns, and that's why I think it was a particularly good channel for us to start with. But yeah, in Waterloo's case, they're the biggest form of work integrated learning in the world, actually, with the 20,000 annual co-op students or interns, you could say, each year. In the US, schools that have co-op include Drexel University, Northeastern, and a few others. It's not as prevalent, but honestly, in the rest of the world, co-op is actually a really big thing. Canada, almost every major university has some form of co-op now.
So you were using your existing knowledge base, that just the things that you knew because you were in that environment, to be able to connect with that. I mean, that's a really a good opportunity, good chance, very, very kind of lucky in that situation. But from growing from there though, how do you, like, how would you even reach out to, like, did you try to expand that intern network and keep on growing that, or how do you grow from there?
Yeah, definitely growing the intern kind of renter demographic was our primary goal. That happened for about, 3.5 years. And then in the last, year and a half, we've expanded that renter demographic to, yeah, travel nurses, which are also consistent, new hires by partnering with relocation companies, even just students looking for off-campus housing. But initially, that was our channel, was growing the intern market coming to us, including, yeah, other schools that would send us interns. Summers are obviously especially big in the U.S., since the colleges that don't have a form of work integrated learning just have students coming for summer internships.
So how do you even reach out to a school and try to offer that? Because like right now I mean, technically, you'd be like competing against like Sonder or Lyric as far as trying to find, those long-term type of stays, those corporate clients. But instead of you providing the housing that you come out of pocket for, you're just connecting it with the landlord or with the hosts. So how are you doing the same things that like these companies like Sonder and Lyric are doing, or are you doing something different to be able to find these types of corporate clients?
Yeah, so partnerships are huge for us. I would say that is our maybe secret sauce, you could say. We just started reaching out to as many, in this case, tech companies in Silicon Valley as possible to say, hey, you should send all your year-round interns our way. And I think the reason our argument was stronger than, Sonder or Zeus or someone going to them is because we could say, we're the one-stop shop for all their furnished housing needs. We also help them find roommates. The roommate matching, I think, was a huge plus as well. But yeah, instead of that employer having to have, 20 links to different operators, they could just have one Copa link that, their interns could then find housing at whatever operator was on there. So yeah, that was kind of our secret sauce. We honestly have never really uh, approach too many schools. Schools have a much longer and slower sales cycle. So, it can take a year to really become an official housing resource with the school. Whereas, employers, especially tech, are how to offer a new and innovative service like that.
So you were reaching out to all of these tech companies being in the Silicon Valley area, and just saying like, hey, this is the site that you can go to. You don't have to use all these other sites. You can just use ours, and that was kind of your pitch.
Yeah, you don't have to use the others, but also the kind of roommate housemate matching that we do is another huge plus, because the employers would have to do that themselves previously. And we actually even took those conversations to the next level, where some employers even set to offer like premises and get out returns. So we actually even enabled employees to book the spaces directly through Copa, or they could pay us for additional services for their interns that included guaranteed housing.
So what's the difference from, let's say, Copa and like corporate housing by owners? So like corporate housing by owners is another, kind of aggregate site where they just connect with different types of property owners that have fully furnished housing. What's the difference between you two?
Yeah, I would say compared to corporate housing by owner, we are geared toward the younger demographics of corporate traveler, interns, new hires, new grads. Um, we are very much focused on our technology, right? Making sure we have a great user interface, user experience, which those younger demographics especially appreciate. I think, yeah, anyone using technology a lot nowadays, let's say like in their 20s, I think will tend to go for, that application that, they find a lot easier to use, versus, one that maybe they see as a little clunkier. So yeah, we're also not geared toward, the general business traveler quite yet. So I think that's the major difference.
Okay. And you're reaching out to these companies, these tech companies, as a host that is trying to get more direct bookings. Let's say, there's a host that's by like an airport. Are you, for Copa, are you trying to target like, where would you be trying to target, like if you had a property in a specific type of location and you were trying to fill direct clients with that property?
Yeah. So for the workers that we help, the interns, new grad hires, just new hires in general, being near the businesses is huge. So in the case of a city, being near downtown is pretty big. Seattle is one of our other big cities now too, and we help a lot of Amazon new hires. So if hosts have a property near South Lake Union, that is especially valuable there. For the travel nurses we help, if they're near a hospital, that is particularly helpful. Sometimes, those can coincide where the, big buildings are and the employers, hospitals tend to be nearby. Now with the kind of third channel, I'd say we've been approaching with schools. If you are near a university to offer off-campus housing, um, that helps as well. But really, commute is huge for our renters. They all want to be as close as possible to where they're working, at the employer, where they're going to be a nurse, let's say at the hospital, or where they're going to be going to school.
What about for hosts that are in more like rural or vacation destinations, like not necessarily a downtown? Are those hosts able to still get those types of direct bookings? Like, who would you even reach out to in order to try to get people to stay directly with you if let's say you're in a rural location?
Yeah, absolutely. We are more than happy to support like hosts in rural locations. In those cases, it still could be, let's say, off-campus housing because universities can kind of be in the middle of nowhere sometimes. Um, uh, you know, there still could be cases of those workers, say like construction workers, there for a 6-month project. Maybe military, maybe even like an oil company that has moved a new project there. So there definitely are cases of renters needing a place to live in those rural areas. We're now approaching some of those potential partners, like construction staffing agencies, um, oil staffing agencies, like film studios, even if they're going to go, film a movie for half a year somewhere. We're starting to approach them now too. But yeah, I think those are the first ones that come to mind in terms of rural, like where you could have construction. I would say is a big one.
That's super interesting. Just kind of thinking. I want the hosts that are listening to this to understand, like, if you have a property in a specific location, you're trying to look and see, like, okay, who are my target guests? Who would be my target client? But what you're doing, Jack, is you have thousands of properties across the U.S., and then you're trying to connect those thousands of people with the same, with the people that they're looking for. Essentially, it's just you're going through the process of reaching out to these companies, reaching out to these construction companies, and basically filling it for them. So, they might be able to do it themselves, but, for the hosts that aren't doing that, you're basically just allowing these companies to be able to find them easier. Who are you contacting when you're pitching these, or when you're calling these companies and saying, "Hey, I've got all of these properties that are available for these midterm stays"? Who do you talk to? Do you just call the front desk and be like, who's the person in charge here, or who's that
Yeah,
gatekeeper?
I would say, yeah. So the question is kind of like who at the potential partners do we communicate with?
Right.
No, it really does depend, right? Like, let's say for a film studio, they tend not to have like a housing staff member, right? That's like dedicated to finding housing for the staff. It's more just, a general management kind of member that has to deal with the logistics of filming somewhere. With construction staffing, again, like, yeah, they don't tend to really have like a specific person on housing. So it honestly varies. Like I haven't found really like a pattern per se where there's like, oh, this title is what they tend to have. But in other scenarios, there is a title, right? Like off-campus housing. Almost every university has a dedicated team for that we can contact. Medical staffing can be hit and miss, right? Like sometimes you'll have someone that a big part of what they do is explicitly helping find housing for the nurses. But in many cases, they don't have that person. So you're just like trying to find who to talk to. And that's really, where we think we can add value to hosts as well, is like we can do the dirty work of forming all these partnerships and sending the renters your way. So then hopefully that, relatively small 1% service fee we charge is worth, that work we're putting in. And one thing worth noting too is, it might go without saying, but it's geography dependent, right? So depending on the city you're in, there are different industries that send people your way. So Seattle obviously is big with tech, but Pittsburgh, for example, is maybe bigger on like medical and oil and actually film is like bigger than you'd think. So yeah, depending on the city, those are different kind of partners we're going after too.
And you just call, like, let's say there's a host in nowhere, Missouri, and they're trying to find people in their area to be able to help them stay direct because Copa's not there, or there's just no other good sources. They're trying to find those direct clients. Who would they be contacting? Like, what do you call, like, the front desk of the business, or do you send them a letter? Like, how do you reach out to these people?
Yeah, front desk doesn't hurt to start. Yeah, and just telling your story. Like, as a host, you could say, yeah, I have available spaces in this current state of affairs. They are clean, discounted, blah blah blah, and I'm just looking to help people that need housing. And that first person you talk to will usually direct you, point you in the right direction. Um, yeah, it's there definitely isn't like a secret formula to, technically you could call it B2B sales. But yeah, it's just a grind of getting on the phone.
And what would you say is the biggest fear that you faced when starting Copa and trying to find, hosts to be able to, come onto the platform, and then also these businesses to be able to work with?
Yeah, we're fortunate to have been supply constrained pretty much since day one. We had the renters coming to us, like they acknowledged the benefit we provided over a Craigslist, a Facebook, even Airbnb with the savings that they see. Um, but yeah, getting the supply has always been the hardest part. So in terms of fear, maybe is a bit much. I wouldn't say I'm like too afraid of something. It's I think I'm so driven by my own passion to solve the problem I had that I'm not really like scared of whatever it is that I'll face. But yeah, getting enough hosts for all the renters coming to us has definitely been the hardest part because one thing I tend to say too is the average host is maybe an older audience that didn't grow up with the technology younger generations have, right? So while younger generations might view technology more as a tool, older generations might view it more as a chore. And convincing people who view technology as a chore that, hey, you should try this new technology, it's easier said than done. It takes a lot of kind of direct sales, typically calling every host to say, hey, I have this thing that can help you. Um, Let me explain how. So yeah, getting enough supply for the renters we have has always been the hardest part.
I know, Jack, you left me a 3 minute voicemail, or three calls with three separate voicemails. So the hustle is very real, and getting people to take action and take moves, is a lot more challenging than maybe people realize. What were some of those obstacles that you faced getting hosts onto your platform, and then also obstacles that you faced with the businesses that you were trying to get acquire new supply, or acquire new leads coming from?
Yeah, I guess obstacles with getting new hosts first. Um, Again, since it's the average host I think we cater to maybe doesn't find technology as easy as others. Uh, Getting that experience down, so creating your account and listing your space is as seamless as possible, took years. I mean, we iterated on the listing edit process over a dozen times. We just kept sitting down with our hosts and saying, okay, I'm going to watch you make a listing. Don't ask for help, but say when you're confused about something. And we would just watch them, see what parts were confusing, fix that, do it again. And honestly, yeah, we iterated enough times that finally, you know, the host could easily make a listing and now actually even copy like 80% of the details over from Airbnb automatically, so that from like coming to Copa's website to having your listing published could take less than 10 minutes. So that was a huge obstacle. Like that was one of the biggest obstacles we faced as a company. And then, yeah, in terms of the businesses and forming new partnerships, I wouldn't say there's like obstacles per se, but more just it takes a lot of time and effort. There's definitely some seasonality. There's better times to reach out to these companies. throughout the year. So that part can be tough where you learn, oh, okay, I really shouldn't reach out to, um, I don't know, maybe financial institutions as tax season is approaching or something like that. Or right now, there's certain companies that are busier than ever with the craziness going on, and some that are have more time than ever. So yeah, finding which ones are the right ones to reach out to right now is another learning.
It's it's like you really have to kind of understand the local market to be able to find the people to be able to stay in your properties. Like I thought it was super interesting when you said, like in Pittsburgh, it's very oil driven and there's a lot of filmmakers. And as a host that has a property there, when you're trying to find people to stay with you, it's like being able to understand, like, okay, now is probably not the best time to be able to reach out to these companies or reach out to these people. And these are the types of people that are within my market. When you're creating a direct, a online travel agency or a direct booking site, really it's like you have to understand what every single market is and who are all the people there, who are the hosts, who are the people that would be staying with you. It sounds like a lot of work.
Oh man, yeah, no, it really is. I mean, any marketplace where it's two-sided is more challenging than, I guess some businesses could be. But then, yeah, once you add even more players into the game, in our case, partners, it's a lot to juggle, and yeah, figuring out how to nail down the renter experience, the host experience, and then also the kind of partner experiences. It's a challenge.
What about for, because there's companies like Google. Google probably has their own like housing supplier or their own like corporate housing or something like that. Have you noticed like a lot of companies that already partnered with different types of companies to be able to provide them that housing?
Yeah. So in the case of those bigger companies, they typically work with a relocation company. So we approach those relocation companies to say, hey, those different clients you have, whether it's Amazon, Google, whatever, we are a great resource for, those new hires, especially the interns, the, maybe younger working professionals. And I would say in general, the only time it's maybe a dead end is if they provide corporate housing, right? Because then they maybe just don't even have any need for, helping their employees actually find a place to live on their own. But in most cases, the companies are happy to offer more resources, right? Like it's just more help that they get to offer their employees. So it doesn't hurt to, add a link to the list, for example. And a lot of them tend to kind of filter through that list every year, let's say. So they'll ask their employees, okay, what did you use? What didn't you use? And then, remove the links that no one really did use and maybe bump up the links that people did use.
So tapping into a relocation company where they're able to utilize your listings or your property is also another. So as a host, as an individual host, if we knew, like, being in the DC area, I know Amazon is coming in. As a host, should we be reaching out to these companies like Amazon and saying, hey, can you put me on your list, or is that a little bit too much?
Yeah. In the case of being an individual host or property manager approaching them, I actually wouldn't recommend that because it honestly will probably end up being a waste of time, especially with the bigger companies. If they have offloaded their housing help to relocation companies, first of all, they don't even really, they wouldn't even be the ones to talk to, right? They would have to point you to the relocation company. But then also as a relocation company, they some do want to work directly with an operator, a host, but usually only if it's like a big, many, many, many units that host would have. Um, so, that's why, yeah, if relocation companies took those calls with every individual host, that could become a crazy list of listings that they now have to manage. So that honestly maybe isn't the best direction to go. I would say as an individual host, if you're trying to, you know, get bookings directly from the source, instead of using a Copa, an Airbnb, whatever, really maybe just trying to reach out to local organizations would be the most helpful. Something specific to your area, like again those industries we mentioned, where maybe there are I don't know, an oil company, let's say, that is nearby that staffs people to your area. who you could house.
Are companies looking for a certain requirement or certain things to be able to stay with a host? Because hosts have different types of um, different standards, and right now, like as we're even seeing, like this episode's probably going to come out a little bit further when the news got released. But like Airbnb today said, hey, we're going to have this like set cleaning standard, trying to make like the universal for the sharing economy. For companies though that are utilizing midterm stays, do they have like specific requirements in order to be able to accommodate those for their employees or whoever?
Yeah, definitely. Especially right now with the current craziness, they do want to see a cleaning standard. A big one, even outside of the current state of affairs, um, flexible cancellation policies is something a lot of companies like, medical staffing agencies especially. So if you're trying to house travel nurses, those medical staffing agencies want to see a flexible cancellation policy, right? Because travel nurses, their gig at the hospital could get canceled or moved like at a moment's notice, right? And the nurse, has no control over it. It's not their fault. So if the host, doesn't have a flexible cancellation policy, yeah, the medical staffing agencies aren't going to be inclined to send them your way. Yeah, that's a good question. So that, flexible cancellation, definitely right now trying to hit cleaning standards. Uh, Overall, what we tend to recommend to our hosts on Copa is, have just great photos that tell the story, right, and paint a picture of where this renter is going to be living. Take them in the corner of the room at the brightest time of day. Um, you know, Basically look at some of those big companies like Sonder and try and make your listing look like theirs. Like they've hired a whole team to just analyze what really converts renters to booking our listings. So you don't have to do the hard work of, A/B testing. Okay, what little details can I tweak on my listing? You can just look at the companies that have already done that work for you, and yeah, just kind of take what they've done. Have a good description that shows your personality. One little pro tip I tend to give too, if we're looking specifically at like your listing on a Copa or an Airbnb, is yeah, try and make it unique. Like make it have some personality in there. If you just do your kind of generic 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in city, like that doesn't really, stand out at all. But if maybe there was a theme in there, like I don't know, had Star Wars figurines throughout, you could be like, some specific live with Darth Vader or something like that, to a certain extent, obviously, but I think having some personality can really catch people's eye too.
Yeah, it's very experiential. And do you see that the companies that are a lot of the companies, they're looking for places that have an experience? Because usually when I think of like just a traditional corporate housing, I usually think of kind of something that's traditional, a little bit more old school, catering maybe towards an older demographic like the business professional. But for a lot of more millennials or the newer hosts, they're looking for an experience. Have you found that companies are also looking for a certain type of listing as opposed to traditional listings?
That's a good point. With companies actually, booking the spaces through Copa, they maybe are, uh, just as inclined to book the more traditional, yeah, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in city kind of listing. Because, it's, I guess, professional is definitely something that they're trying to check off the list. But yeah, with a lot of the renters we help, where it's, not as much those kind of older general business travelers. Yeah, the renters we help, like millennials and whatnot, are definitely looking for, yeah, some experience. Yeah.
Awesome. We're going to be wrapping up here. I know that we've taken quite a bit of your time, but I'm curious, since you're kind of in the same space as like, Sonder, Zeus, you're all kind of trying to find the same, source, trying to get the people to stay at your properties. Again, they are paying for the properties, and they have a lot more at stake than you do, since you're just connecting the supply to the leads. But do you think that there still is a place for Or do you think that these companies, these master lease companies, are going to be able to thrive continuing on, or is it going to shift to where more individual hosts are going to be able to get more direct stays? Like, is it that challenging to be able to, or would companies like that be able to really find the leads that will just be their sole supplier? Like, they're dependent, like a Saunders is very dependent on, let's say that Waterloo. And if Waterloo dries up, then it's like, well, there goes all the business for, their housing. Do you think that that's a sustainable model?
Yeah, it's a good question. So one trend I think will happen is there will be a shift toward medium term stays that we do from short term. I think people have realized it just is more reliable. So if something does happen on the vacation front, you can have something more reliable. So I think we'll see that shift. In terms of a shift from the master lease companies to more individual homeowners, it's honestly tough to say. But, I will say we're trying to give those individual homeowners a fighting chance, right? Like, fundamentally, companies that can just optimize an kind of operations standpoint, like the Zeus's and Saunders and them, they do have that advantage, right? They can like find these cleaners that they charge the lease to, and use technology to automate like the messaging and everything, so that they can spend less time. But yeah, I think fundamentally individual homeowners and hosts can offer the best experience, right? Like, you have that opportunity to personalize the experience. If you run just one house, let's say, that you rent out, you could do stuff that the Saunders and them could never do. Like, you could pick up your renters from the airport. You could, take them to Costco for the first trip that they need. Like, you can do stuff, you have an advantage. And yeah, we personally, we're trying to help those individuals kind of have a fighting chance. So yeah, in terms of where the market will shift, I don't know, but I do hope, yeah, the individual hosts will thrive.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jack, for taking the time. Do you have any last things that you want to share? Maybe a best way that someone can reach out to you if they have any more questions?
Yeah, email me, jack@copa.co, if I can be of any help. It's, I guess, for those listening, jack@kopa.co. And yeah, if your space is a good fit for Copa for Good, we'd love to send the travel nurses, students, and others your way right now. So yeah, just email us and we can opt you into Copa for Good as well.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. Or if you're on Furnished Finder in the DC area, expect a call from Jack with a with a minute long voicemail about the Copa. But no, I thought that was so funny. I was just like, yeah. How did this guy find me? Maybe I didn't respond quick enough, but no, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Jack. I'll include all the links down below in the description. I think that's so cool. Thank you for taking the time to explain your story, and excited to see where Copa is going to go in the future as well.
I'm happy to. Thank you.
All right. And until next time, Host Nation, keep on hosting. Hope you hosts benefited from the show. If you found value, please go on over to iTunes, leave us a review, and let us know what you enjoy about the show. If you'd like to talk to hosts that have been featured in these episodes as well as the community, go on over to our Facebook group, The Host Nation.